The ANC could have done a straight coalition with us. They could have done a straight coalition with MK. And I think they might have been able to do a coalition with the EFF to get over 50%. Now, they didn't want to choose any of them. That's why they decided to call it a government of national unity. The first party that excluded itself was MK, then the EFF, and we were kind of the last man standing. The turning point came when we realized what we had to do to prevent a coalition of MK, EFF, and ANC. That would have been a total disaster for the economy. The rand would have crashed through the floor. There would have been a mass exodus of any form of investment in South Africa, and unemployment would have gone.
What would have been the imperative, would you have said, to go the route of the GNU?
Well, you had to have a coalition government because no party got above 50%, right? And the ANC could have done a straight coalition with us. They could have done a straight coalition with MK. And I think they might have been able to do a coalition with the EFF to get over 50%. I haven't added that up. It would have been very close. And they might have needed one more small party with the EFF to get over the line. So those are the coalitions that the ANC could have done. And the question was, which one would they choose? Now, they didn't want to choose any of them. That's why they decided to call it a government of national unity. They started off having talks with everybody and allowed parties to exclude themselves. The first party that excluded itself was MK, then the EFF, and we were kind of the last man standing.
And you, as federal chair, you would have been central to all the calculations and the considerations of which way to go, who to talk to, etc. Now, could you take us behind the scenes? Now, before the election, you're competing directly with the ANC.
Yes.
At what point, where is the turning point where you're saying, okay, guys, we've seen the numbers post the election, let's go for a conversation with the ANC?
The turning point came when we realized what we had to do to prevent a coalition of MK, EFF, and ANC. That would have been a total disaster for the economy. The rand would have crashed through the floor. There would have been a mass exodus of any form of investment in South Africa, and unemployment would have gone from 40% to 60%. So we knew we had to stop that. And then the question was, how do we stop that? Now, we knew that we had the numbers to stop that. And we knew that we had a lot of leverage. Now, we had to decide for ourselves, how will we use that leverage? There were lots of people in our party who were not happy at all with the notion of going into a coalition with the ANC. Because, as you rightly say, we'd fought them for many, many, many years. And there were some that wanted us to stay in opposition. And there were others that wanted us to do a confidence and supply model, which would be us taking the legislature, the speaker and all the portfolio committee chairs and all the oversight positions, and we would have gone for some other oversight positions such as, let's say, the public protector, the Human Rights Commission, etc., and perhaps more seats on the Judicial Service Commission as a check and balance to the abuse there. And then let the ANC take the executive. So that was definitely a model which we discussed at some length. And it was a very complex conversation that we had. In the end, we decided on what we called the hybrid model, which would be to take a limited number of seats in the executive and to have seats in the oversight and in the portfolio committees and in Parliament, and then very much play the role of keeping and building a centrist government, as well as crucially affecting the way South Africa is governed, showing the DA difference at national level, crucially, and equally ensuring that we could impact our portfolios and make sure that South Africa was governed better. So that is what we set out to do. That wasn't a unanimous support of the party, but enough people in the party supported it, and we are a democratic organization, so we go with what the majority decides in the right forums, and then that's what we went for.
And in terms of your support base, I take it the process of explaining, stroke selling the agreement continues. But how has the GNU gone down with your support base?
Very well. We did polling throughout the whole period, of course, because we poll every day in the DA. And DA supporters were very, very much in favor of us going in, because they knew the alternative was the EFF and MK going in, and that would be the end, literally. It's an existential question for South Africa. It's an absolutely existential question around whether we have an economy, whether we create more jobs. I mean, it is do or die when you get to those moments. And mostly, DA voters understand that.
And there was no...
They were fine. There were
no
an
confusion.
overwhelming number of DA voters supported it.
Now,
yeah, interesting, guys. So Helen Zille here, if you've seen, she explained how the DA had to do all it could to try to prevent an ANC, EFF, or MK coalition, and that was actually one of the basis of the many compromises the DA actually had to put. And I know Herman Mashaba has actually blamed the DA for, I think he actually said that the DA allowed the corruption or encouraged or maybe tolerated the corruption within the ANC by forming this government of national unity. But like from Helen Zille here, she speaks about how, they couldn't sit by and watch an alternative being the EFF or the MK party coalition with the ANC, that it would have crashed the rand, it would have caused a major capital flight from South Africa and, put South Africa in a really dim light, in terms of foreign direct investment and all that. So it's really tricky how to interpret that, because it's something that is still like conjecture. Nobody can actually per se say for certainty that what she alludes to might actually have become the reality, in that South Africa would have plunged deeply if there was a sort of like ANC, MK, EFF coalition. But at the same time, we see that the MK party has largely been totally against the constitution of South Africa. It wants to overturn this constitution and try to introduce a new form of indigenous constitution that would actually have been a basis for the fracture that Helen Zille actually argues, because then it would actually have put the economy and political landscape of South Africa in a total disarray, where no one would really understand how to rebuild, and all that, and then probably spark what many have called Western Cape independence, because then the Western Cape would argue that the reason for their secession would be to preserve the constitution of South Africa as was originally crafted from the beginnings of the nation state. And so it would have actually been a disaster and a disarray. And so the DA actually argues that it actually had to represent sort of like a watchman, so to speak, to prevent this, disarray from coming to the fore. And the EFF, anyway, when you watch the EFF, the last party, the anniversary, they're still pushing hard to the effect that, one day they would be in the leadership of the country and the nation of South Africa, and that, they will revert the gains of what has actually been termed a lot by white monopoly capital, the expropriation of land without compensation and all that, and really standing strong on their ideals. And so it actually frames the politics of South Africa in a really strange light for me, because it would really be tricky not to actually say that, one day the Progressive Caucus or some members of the Progressive Caucus would not assume leadership in South Africa. And for how long would the GNU be willing to fight? Because Helen Zille is actually raising also another fear, in that if President Cyril Ramaphosa becomes deposed from the government of national unity, like President Ramaphosa seems to be the string holding all the wires, in this whole government of national unity. But if President Ramaphosa becomes deposed probably in the next ANC conference and Paul Mashatile then assumes presidency, Helen Zille actually is not really positive about that transition, and that she's not really sure that, you know, there would be a smooth flow in the government of national unity, especially in terms of the relationship between the ANC and the DA if Paul Mashatile becomes president. And so we might see an internal fracture of this government of national unity. Gayton Mckenzie argues that, you know, South Africans might end up loving the government of national unity for these 5 years, that they might demand another 5 years for the government of national unity. But if we see a deposition of or an exit of President Ramaphosa from the seat, and Paul Mashatile, which probably, according to Helen Zille, might now spark a sort of like internal collapse of the government of national unity, then I don't really know how that would, you know, transcend and then, you know, give probably a certain form of leverage to a political shift towards the left, with the Progressive Caucus now weighing in heavily and pushing, you know, fully to dominance in terms of leadership, especially, you know, with the Progressive Caucus. Julius Malema has actually argued that, you know, the GNU would not last because of the internal fracas that actually goes on between the members of the government of national unity. So at the end of the day, no one understands and knows what would be the prospect of a leftist leadership in South Africa and what that would be and how that would place, you know, South Africa in the geopolitical side of things, with Russia and China coming in to, you know, probably filling the space in terms of the capital flight that we might notice, and then heavy investment of Russia and China, then plunging South Africa into a total leftist state, you know, leftist governed state. But these are really tricky times anyway. We'll keep studying and understanding. It's a tricky way to really interpret South Africa's politics. I really hope that South Africa becomes something that all South Africans can be proud of, to really beat their chest and say, yes, I am citizen of this nation. But anyway, what do you guys think about this speech here by Helen Zille on the compromises the DA had to make to ensure that the ANC and the EFF or the MK party wouldn't get into coalition? Share your thoughts in the comments.